start loading, and we'll wait for this plane. Hold for plane. And here we go. Greetings and salutations, and welcome to the special episode of Playwright Spotlight, our 26th episode and 1 year to the date of beginning. But before we begin, as always, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, share this video with a friend, tell us how this podcast has helped you with your playwriting or your writing in general. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. My next guest's 30-plus plays and adaptations have been seen at over 100 regional theaters, as well as Off-Broadway, and has international productions in over 20 countries. In 2019, he was once again named one of the 20 most produced plays in America by American Theater Magazine. He was awarded the American Theater Critics Association Steinberg New Play Citations for his play Bloomsday, the Kennedy Center Fund for New American Plays Award for both fiction and still life with Iris, the Penn USA Award in Drama for Lonely Planet, and the Edgar Award for the Mystery Writers of America for Sherlock Homes, The Final Adventure. Other plays include Becky's New Car, This Random World, Last of the Boys, Rancho Mirage, Shooting Star, Yankee Tavern, Inventing Van Gogh, Private Eyes, Rocket Man, God's Country, and The Need of Variations. He taught in the MFA Playwriting program and Directing program at the UT Austin for 12 years, and currently serves as a Dramatists Guild traveling master, teaching workshops in playwriting, story making, and collaboration across the U.S. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to bring on Mr. Stephen Dietz.
Oh, thank you. It's very kind of you.
My gosh, it's getting more and more of a mouthful the more I do this podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. As I think I mentioned when we first made contact with you, and thank you for taking the time to come on. Yours was the first full-length professional production that we produced. Back then, we were Epiphany Productions, and then we became Punk Monkey Productions. And it was a great pleasure to be a part of your play.
I'm so honored. How did you find that play? How did you settle on that play?
That I have to credit to my ex-wife.
All right.
It was a play that she loved. She'd always wanted to do. And we kind of approached producing as quit waiting for somebody else to give you permission to do the work you want to do. If you want to be in a play, go get the rights, produce it yourself, find a director, and cast yourself in it. There's nobody stopping you from doing it. So that's how.
Absolutely. Well, God bless you. And also just, as we start, congratulations on the success of this. Right?
Thank you very much.
You got a year of these in the books, and you're letting us talk and share our craft. And I went back and checked out some of your previous ones, and it's great. It's a great dialogue for us all to have.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. The way I looked at it is like I do workshops myself. I'm certainly not a master at playwriting by any means. I have a sense of what works and what doesn't, and I work with a lot of beginning playwrights.
Yep.
And so I just wanted this to be a resource for not just the younger playwrights, but any playwrights that want to start out that, may not be able to grasp all the books and everything that's out there, because you can only buy so many books and they can only shoot you so much. But when you actually get to talk to a playwright and how they approach it, it's a wonderful resource, or that's what I want it to be. So I appreciate that.
There's the equivalent of exactly what you said about your theater company and finding yourself a role and doing it. That's sort of taking that sort of agency and then looking around and asking for help and playing in the bracket above you. All those things are real, but just to jump in and do it is huge, and to share resources, because we should be able to do that even better than we are now.
Absolutely. So on that note, where did you study, and then where and how did you get your start?
I never took this is terrible for a lifelong teacher to say. I've never took a playwriting class in my life, but I had awesome English teachers in high school. Didn't go to any plays. My dad was a railroad conductor. First play my dad saw was a play I wrote many years later. So the one little sidebar to that is that I feel like at the age where a lot of my pals who I had gotten into theater with, because the parties were fun, etc. By the time they were just sick of theater because they had grown up on it, I was in the honeymoon phase. When I got to college, I was just learning. So I went to the University of Northern Colorado. There was not a playwriting program there, but I got a general theater degree. And of course, I staunchly said they had a wonderful education program. They produced a lot of great drama teachers, etc. And with all due arrogance of a college student, I was there saying, I'm never going to teach. I'm going to work in the theater profession. I had no idea what that was. I'd never met a playwright. I'd probably been to 2 plays in my life. And the irony being that in addition to my very fortunate career, I've now been able to teach for, whether it's at university or master classes, which I'm still doing, for most of my career. But my fundamental education, the only way to narrow down this answer is I stumbled onto, literally my car broke down on a trip around the country. My car broke down on East Franklin Avenue in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I drove there right after graduation and from Northern Colorado. And I walked in to use the phone at an old church. And it turned out that wasn't a church anymore. It was a place called the Playwrights Center. True story.
Wow.
And by absolute kismet, I walked in there and I saw this literature, and somebody said to me, well, yeah, we work on new plays here. So at least I was smart enough, as foolish as I was, to go back to Colorado, get all my stuff, and move to Minneapolis.
Wow.
And my grad school and I still hadn't written a play yet. My introduction to playwriting was that I was, and to directing, which is how I started, because you can lie your way into directing. You can't really lie your way into playwriting.
I kind of did that myself.
but I arrived, the zeitgeist that I walked into, August Wilson had just arrived, and Lee Blessing had just arrived, Barbara Field, Marisha Chamberlain. This amazing group of writers had John Olive had just gathered at the Playwrights Center. And that's who I hung out with for 11 years.
Wow. So you basically worked out of Playwrights Center in Minneapolis for that time.
Yeah. And I started getting I started as a director, and then I would, maybe a reading would happen there and I would direct it. And then that play would maybe get picked up and somewhere. And then I would go there and work on it. And then I think you can only really direct other people's new plays or give notes on other people's new plays for so long before someone just turns to you and says, write your own play.
Fair enough.
And I did. And then I started doing that. And I had a great group of people around me to learn from.
What was your first play that you wrote?
Oh my God, I'm not even sure I'm equipped to tell you the title. I only thought of it because I've been trying to catalog for other reasons, the plays of mine. And I had to go back and really think of titles from plays. Nothing ever happened with it. I believe it embarrassingly was a play called Dark Sunrise.
Okay. Well,
and nothing ever happened with it. I had a reading of it. I'm sure I believed it was a masterpiece. But you got to start somewhere.
What was the first play that was produced and then published?
Yeah.
Not to say that those have to be the same.
Yeah, that was a little comedy I wrote in the mid '80s called More Fun Than Bowling, and it still gets done. It's kind of a Midwestern comedy about a guy that buries his ex-wives, and he uses bowling as a metaphor for life. Do you know that play?
It was a lot of fun to read, and I'll be honest with you, it kind of set my mind at ease a little bit, because going through your work made me really insecure and made me really want to throw everything, because I tend to bash myself as a playwright for being a little bit of a simpleton when it comes to clever phrases and dialogue, and it's a little discouraging when when reading and there's more elaborate and complex pieces, and I found that while reading your work, and that's not a bad thing. It's definitely a bit of a backhanded compliment. So
thank you for reading it.
I forgave myself a little bit more after reading More Fun Than Bowling, because I just finished my first length.
Okay.
And somebody was like, oh, it's a little Americana, it's a little Eugene O'Neill, a little bit like that. And it was like, and then I'm like, all right, that's okay. And then while going through and reading your stuff, I'm like, I can't even fathom how to get to this level. That being said, so More Fun Than Bowling came around, and then I also remembered reading Stephen King's On Writing. And so those are both things that have helped, a bit, but just I don't come up with phrases. Here's the one. This is one, and I don't know what it was. There was something about reading Inventing Van Gogh, and it's a simple phrase that you threw in there called unrivaled abandon.
Mm.
And it's just like, I'm like, how do you get to that point? And then, and then the other one was like, later on in that play is like, I am the great believer in homeopathic medicine and the great lover of melancholy. I've studied it, written of it, and treated it. And now I'm married to it. And that, I don't know. I mean, how can playwrights achieve this level of sophistication, for lack of a better word, and can it be taught?
Well, I believe, yes, we can have a longer conversation about that. I absolutely believe playwriting can be taught. We just have to define what we are teaching. On that particular corner, I would say the musicality of language. I mean, the theater's first language is poetry. Poetry in the sense of more meaning in less time. So you and I, we don't have a 300-page novel that people can pick and choose. We get one chance, we get one sitting in a proximate event, and that is much closer to someone reading a poem aloud, where you need certain words to just hit you quickly and strongly. And so I believe there's such a thing as voice, but just in those, I don't really remember writing those lines you said, and then that they sound familiar to me. But what's funny when you said that, James, is I recognize the rhythms. I don't remember the words until you said them, but I remember that my ear, that sounded like a Stephen Dietz line to me. And I don't mean good or bad. I just mean that sounded like as you went that line, I heard that line go da 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 da, or whatever it was. And that, I think, is a musicality that can be inculcated. I mean, I was a bad drummer. I'm a bad piano player. But I listen to a lot of music. Probably most writers I know do. But I did take a poetry class. My college didn't offer a playwriting class, and one of the poets that was taught was Richard Hugo, the great Pacific Northwest poet, whose book The Triggering Town. It's a book I always recommend. It's called The Triggering Town, and yes, it's about poetry, but it's mainly about some of the stuff that we're talking about right here. And his point being is like always never go for the meaning, always go for the sound. Go for the sound.
Fascinating.
Only the sound is empirical. I can say blue, and you and I can see or hear different things, but it will sound exactly the same. And so I think some of my craft, and now I'm a little off the beam here, sorry. Some of my craft became land the phrase, and then maybe it has meaning behind it. Maybe it moves the scene forward. I don't know, but land the phrase. I mean, I have a line in my play Becky's New Car, which has probably become my most produced play, where Walter, the kind of befuddled millionaire, right. Out of the blue, I just wrote this line. He's kind of talking about his life, and he says, "I don't know, life is chaos and holidays." Now that's a clever line, but it has 2 double A's in it. Chaos, holidays. Our ear clicks those things in. Our ear clicks in short words at ends of sentences. There's a reason it's not Hyde and Jekyll, that it's Jekyll and Hyde.
Sure.
There's a reason we don't end on Romeo. We end on the T of Juliet. So those things, I think, as we get aware of them, I've gone on too long about this, but
no, you have not. No, because that's what the purpose of this podcast is, about unpacking, and there's questions that I may ask in that regard as well. Yeah.
So
how can that be taught?
I think it's taught through practice. I think it's taught through hearing. I think it's taught. I mean, let me back up and say this. This has almost sort of come up in some of the stuff we've talked about already. Is I think one of the biggest things that young playwrights encounter, or aspiring playwrights of any age, is there's almost like a scab. I'm trying to use the grossest image possible. There's almost like this scab of mythology around playwriting that has to do with inspiration, that has to do, frankly, even with talent, and has to do with voice. And I felt like job one of my teaching was to sort of yank that scab off. so the writer that would say to me, I don't have any ideas for plays, I said, I don't believe you. That's not true. Well, I'm kind of blocked. I don't believe you. That's not true. I avidly feel that inspiration is a con. I think it's a con game. It's how writers who don't write tell themselves, forgive themselves. I don't have any inspiration. I'm waiting for something to inspire me. I think talent is a fluke of fate. So a lot of it is just removing the mythology that you're going to find a story. I don't believe stories are found. I believe they're made. If you're a playwright, as you know, everybody rushes up to you and says, you know what would make a great play? And then the very thing they write, and then what do they not give you? A play.
Right.
They give you a move, and I'll take anything. I'm a sponge and a whore. I'll take, you give me a funny story about your uncle, dude, you better put it in your play, because me and Jeff Hatcher will put it in a play tomorrow, pal. But that notion of it, stories are made. So my story work, and there's a lot of craft stuff we can go into, is a lot of story making. Start with that image. A man brings a chair into a map store. I don't have the idea for my play Lonely Planet. I just know a guy brings a chair into a map store. And then my craft is disrupting that, asking questions of it. And I will also, just as all these sidebars, I will say the other mythology is that writing can't be taught. I don't think inspiration can be taught. And again, I think it's a con. And I'm saying that a little bit so that people that watch this podcast get a little bugged by that, right? Have I been inspired or gotten a little idea? Of course, I love for that. But I can't walk around on a Wednesday knowing I have the morning free and I want to write and wait for inspiration. I have to just do it. So I think it's this notion of inspiration can't be taught, talent can't be taught, but craft can be taught. And it's ironic to me that we literally believe people can be taught to fly the space shuttle. And we literally believe people can be taught to do brain surgery, but there are thousands of people walking around saying, well, writing can't be taught. That's just narcissism. And yes, I can't, and I believe in writing classes that there's a lot of writers that teach inspiration or that teach access to your feelings or access. I'm all for that. I'm all for find whatever you need. I think though we do a disservice when somebody says, I want my story to be better. I want my sentence to be better. I want this 3-line exchange to be better. And those things, and I'm not going to have a silver bullet for you in one podcast, but those things can be taught.
Is that a guarantee that you'll come back on? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, sure.
All right, good. All right, I'll hold you to it. So here's the thing, and subtext has come up a lot, and you just brought up Lonely Planet, and I have to say that is a phenomenal example of subtext in my mind. I think because, I was almost disappointed that the back cover gave it away.
Yeah.
That it's, takes place during the AIDS pandemic. And I almost find that it's almost relevant right now as well.
Well, I do.
Like it would have been 2 years ago, I should say,
Yeah, I do believe I have been getting some productions of it laid. God bless that little play. I do have a couple productions coming up that people picked it up and said, Dietz, I think you've written a pandemic play. It is a man is afraid of going outside, right, and another man is bringing in things from outside. And so I actually went back just recently. I directed a 25th anniversary of production of it in Seattle, and I went back and actually tweaked a couple lines that were righteous Stephen Dietz lines from 1992.
Okay.
And they were powerful and good, but I rolled a couple of those back. I don't think you would even notice it probably if you saw it now. But it does, I think, situate in a way. I admire all the AIDS plays that were head on.
Sure.
Normal Heart and As Is, and obviously Kushner's masterpiece. But I think it was a topic that, and we were encouraged. I I still didn't know how to make a story. That's a different conversation. But we were encouraged in that time, James, that there could and should be lots of responses to the AIDS crisis, as opposed to the more mythology. Let's rip these scabs up. That someone write the definitive 9/11 play. Someone write the definitive pandemic play. Can I swear? That's bullshit.
Yeah.
I mean, that's censorious to writers. That's like saying to writers, "Why this play now?" That's censorious. The moment is the moment. You write the play in front of you, and so it was thrilling to me that I didn't know what I was doing, but I had lost friends, right? And it was a harrowing time that we lived through, and now we're in a new harrowing time. But I felt that was my contribution, and I couldn't have written that play a year before, and I couldn't have written that play a year after. And I don't really know what that means that I just said to you, but I watched Lonely Planet, and that Lonely Planet is I could talk you up and down about Van Gogh, because I remember crafting that play. Lonely Planet was like a fever dream. I don't remember making that play.
Interesting. There's so many questions I want to ask now. As far as Lonely Planet goes, I forgot where I was going to go with this. So let's go on to I'll go on to the next one as far as that goes. Do you think you have a style? And if so, what is it?
Yeah, that's the first part of that's easy. Sure. The second part, that's sneaky. And good question.
Well, there's a lot of questions that I don't know if you watch it in past episodes. There's some questions that I throw out that are kind of on the spot ones, but
I like it. I like it because, I mean, having to articulate our process is fantastic. That's the great thing about teaching, is that it makes you come up with language for the things you're doing anyway. And I know I became a better writer, and my craft got better during the 12, 14 years I was teaching full time. And it's one reason I'm still teaching now, and avoiding your question. I would say my, and then I got to tell you about branding here in a second, but I would say my style is lyrical. I would say my style is clever. I'm a plot. That's not a word I use when I teach, but I'm a lover of intricacy. I would say lyricism, intricacy, surprise, and sentiment, which I think is a good word. You can say emotion; it's a sexier word. But I've written harder plays, I've written softer plays, but there's a lyricism, there's the love of the good sentence, and there's a love of reaching for the good sentence, even when you swing and miss. Yeah, there's definitely some intricacies, and I do want to unpack that in a little bit. I don't touch it now. I do want to go back to the question I was going to ask, and that was based on AIDS, and so do you believe that no topic should be untouched, and that it's never too soon? Yes, I believe that. I believe every topic is open, more importantly, to every writer. And I believe then you arrive at your topic, especially if the topic is, I mean, my career is based on writing about things I don't know. Stephen Dietz shows up, and my growing up in Denver, Colorado shows up in my plays, but another scab pull that off. Like, some people do very well writing about what they know. There's fantastic plays in the canon about that. Many of us also have done our best work writing about the thing we wanted to find out about, the white supremacist movement, or the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald in Lake Superior. So there's that. Isn't it a Tom Waits quote in that great Elizabeth Gilbert article where he says, it's not about the thing inside you trying to get out, it's about the thing outside you trying to get in. And I think that's Waits or Gilbert, one of those, in that awesome GQ interview. We can unpack that forever, but yeah, I don't think it, and I don't know. Do I think it's too soon? No, I mean, I don't know. I have a 9/11 play that I don't remember when I wrote it. I'll write something about the pandemic, but it's going to, James, when it's going to be in our ethos, and it's going to be in the air. And my frustration is that in this, in this culture, someone's going to tell a writer it's too soon.
Right.
Someone's going to tell a writer, oh, we already have a good pandemic play.
Sure.
That's again, I think that's sensorial.
But there's always another perspective. So I do want to, there was a moment you touched on that was a great segue for my next question to begin with, as it is. And that's just how do you approach, what's your approach to historical pieces and how they well, actually, this was a follow-up question, but since we're already on historical pieces, how do you research these when it comes to Inventing Van Gogh, God's Country, or even fooling around with infinity?
Well, and that's a good, yeah, definitely. I'm happy to talk about that. Then that's a good example of me, especially as a really young playwright, thinking, well, nothing interesting happened to me growing up in Southwest Denver, and I had a nice family, and I played baseball, and so there was a part of me. If someone had told me, Dietz, write about what you know, I would have. Well, my dad and I put together an aluminum shed in our backyard today, and then Mom made fried. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so early on, and I did get inspired by the writers at the center. At the Playwrights Center, I was looking pretty far outside myself. I'm going to write my nuclear war play, Fooling Around with Infinity. I'm going to write about the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald, which was 10 November, and God's Country. Those three plays, I know I wrote better plays after those plays, but those were things where I realized I can reach, the further I reach outside myself, if I believe in arriving at an adaptation or arriving at a historical play like a good tourist. So when I'm arriving at something familiar like Sherlock Holmes or Dracula, when I'm arriving at something less familiar like a Shusaku Endo novel or Ibsen, a good tourist arrives with humility. And a good tourist researches and asks a lot of questions and does not declare what they think until they've immersed themselves. And so I take my adaptations with, and I've done adaptations of living writers' work, and that'll also teach you, and that can be harrowing and exciting. But I think arriving with humility to the source material, and then I'm going to spin this answer, and then making it your own. And then after that immersion, writing the play you need to write, finding the story on your own and being able to tell that story on your own. And the other thing I learned the hard way in Van Gogh was that Van Gogh just kicked my butt. That was probably this 15, 17 year process. I'm deeply proud of that play. But
so you're deeply what?
I'm deeply proud of that play, but yes. I actually believe I think a play can be over-researched. August didn't research any of his plays. Lloyd Richards would say, hey, August, that thing didn't happen in the 40s. And August would change it. Put that in your 30s play. Okay. And on a need-to-know basis, you can fold in the historical things. But my situation on Van Gogh, I got myself down the rabbit hole so much, and I see writers do this, that I would just box myself in with Van Gogh's life. I just boxed myself in. And now, and the lesson I learned then is I needed the one thing I did not know. The one thing I did not know, or the one thing the audience does not know or cannot know in a historical piece, that's my opening. That's my door. So in Van Gogh, I invented the final Van Gogh self-portrait that has never been found. And that was my portal. And you can't prove that exists or not, nor can I. But immediately, I had Patrick Stone, the painter, who's forging that photo. So in every adaptation now, I'm looking for, what's that thing back in the past? Sure, it's a play about ... What's the thing we don't know? And that, to me, is where I try to put my shovel down for the first time.
because I remember you have a little opening note at the beginning of Inventing Van Gogh, and like all these things that we think we know, but none of them are true. So it was like, okay, well, how much of what I just read is true, or was that all of it not?
Everything the historical characters say is true. Much of it's Van Gogh's letters. But I'm inventing the young woman that he's painting. I'm inventing but the stuff in the present I'm inventing, and the stuff in the past I'm accessing. But that missing painting was the linkage between them, and that cracked the play open slowly. That cracked the play open slowly. But going back, I did an adaptation of Ibsen's Enemy of the People, which was a blast. It's called Paragon Springs, and I love that because I could go back, and to me it's a class in another master playwright's work, and beyond pulling what I believe is the power of it. It makes me, it's story centric, James. It makes me learn, how does this story work? And that sounds so simple, but I think we love all sorts of plays and we don't know how the story works or how the story works on us. And so to me, you asked me about studying playwriting. I feel like each of my adaptations, and I don't know, I've done a dozen of them now or something. I got a couple of them opening coming up. Luckily, those have been my education. And the last thing I'll say on that, I know I'm saying too much.
No, not at all.
The last thing I'll say on that is that then once I carve out what I believe is the story, once I arrive with humility and say thank you to the material, then I feel I owe absolutely no fealty to the source material. Absolutely none. And someone will say, well, you don't, well, but you don't know, what about, I think what Ibsen's intention was, and boy, let's pull this scab off. You will never know a writer's intentions.
Right.
Ever. And that is a cliche. That is like, well, I think he intended. And people at talkbacks of my own plays tell me what I intended. Well, I think, and I love them, and I love talkbacks. If you know anything about me, you'll say I'm the first person that jumps out. I don't want a moderator. I love talkbacks. I get a lot. I use them. I learn a lot from them. But it cracks me up when someone says, I think this is what you intended. You will never know the intention.
It reminds me of that line from Back to School when Rodney Dangerfield calls Kurt Vonnegut. You tell Kurt Vonnegut that he doesn't know anything about Kurt Vonnegut.
I forgot about that. No, it's exactly right. And so, but again, that's, I think, where people get frustrated with. And again, we say to writers, well, you better know everything about, Louisa May Alcott. If you're going to write, you better know everything. I would say, don't know everything. Know something that connects with you or feels fierce to you. And like when I would teach directing, someone would come in and say, I want to direct the Cherry Orchard. And I'd say, great, we'll try and get the Cherry Orchard on the season. And I'd say, tell me what's wrong with it. And they'd say, but I love it. I was saying, yeah, we all do. Yeah, we all do. What's wrong with it? What doesn't work in it? I wouldn't say that. This is grad school, so I'm with
sure.
you.
No.
I'm all in on this student, but I'm trying to make that student not think about the Cherry Orchard the way everybody says about the Cherry Orchard, and to say, well, and then they come back in and say, what makes no sense when so and so comes in, and I go, now you're getting closer to directing that play. You're not going to fix that play. Chekhov doesn't need our help. But that healthy, skepticism is a better word because it has lots of cool syllables. But the best word for it is doubt. That I am trying to instill doubt in myself about my own story as I write. And I know that sounds strange, but I can't write anything out of certainty. Like,
Okay.
oh, I know what this scene is. I mean, I've written those scenes like, yeah, I know what this scene is. And then I wrote it. And why is it so flat? I'm throwing lots at you.
No. Well, I have one other question about adaptations first, and then I want to go do a couple of things you just said about that. So then how do you approach adaptations then? Is it all creative license, or do you just like for Dracula? How did you approach creative license you take with Dracula, if any?
I read the book twice. I've never seen the movie. I'd never seen a version of the play. I later saw the Coppola version.
Sure.
Because I'm a Tom Waits fan. I read the book twice, and the first time through, I just read it. Second time through, I marked moments and lines, moments of not cool moments. And again, I want everyone. I say to the James Eldon world, none of this is a prescription. None of that you don't owe me this. None of this is how you should do it. I'm saying this with the caveat that my process, you may pick something, you may not, but none of this is I don't teach rules, I teach tools, and so if these are tools that are useful to you, great. Second time through that book, second time through multiple adaptations, I'm marking turns. What I call a turn, an escalation, a reversal, a surprise, the things that keep what I call the living play, that thing that keeps a story moving. I'm underlining lines that must be in the adaptation because they're so good. And then after that second time through, I don't open that book again unless I think there was one line I missed, and then I'm going to sketch out what I believe the story from the book was. And I don't mean what it means at all. Literally what happens and what must happen. And then I'm going to narrow that down into what do I want to dramatize and what do I not. That sounds really schematic. It's how I work. And then my passion for then I get to it eventually will pull it just cracks me up to say this phrase, and I blame you. It will eventually pull the Stephen Dietz style out of me. And I'll get to write sentences. Bram Stoker will free me, right? To write, I had a Dracula sentence in my head just a second ago and I forgot it. Bid me stay and be to your final days adored. I can't that's a good line. I can't cram that in Inventing Van Gogh. But right. That's not in the book. But Bram Stoker led me to being able to trust in myself to write like that. And then I'm making a launch. And the last thing I will say is I surrounded myself, and that play was commissioned by David Ira Goldstein at the Arizona Theater Company, who also commissioned Van Gogh, who also commissioned Sherlock Holmes, who also commissioned Rocket Man, who also commissioned Private Eyes. And in the case of Dracula, he filled rehearsal room with really good actors. Patrick Page played Dracula in that. But they were all people really smart about Dracula. And I just picked their brains, like my Sherlock Holmes cast. I'm premiering an Agatha Christie thing next year. It's like get me good actors and get me people who know more about the subject matter than I do. Because it's not my job to be the expert. It's my job to be the scribe.
Sure. I noticed that you have a tendency to sprinkle little moments in that move your place forward, because it's almost, and maybe this goes back to subtext, but the scene is about one thing, and then all of a sudden you throw this other thing, and it just kind of pushes it forward. I'm like, how do you are those planned moments? How do you achieve that?
Boy, I don't think so. I think let me come at it. This is a great question. Thank you. Let me come at it this way. Let's take it out of the land of adaptation for a second. Let's talk about.
No, yeah, definitely.
Let's say I have an original. I have an original story. I'm early on. Maybe I don't even have a draft, but I have a basic And I sometimes outline and I sometimes don't. Writers ask that a lot. I will often, because I don't walk around thinking I have any ideas. I will jot a bunch of things on a legal pad just to my right here, in case I get really stuck on this scene. Oh, it'd be cool to have somebody say this or do this. There's just a basic cheat sheet. But say I basically know an overview of what's going to happen. Well, as soon as I say that, that means I have an ending conceived or contrived, more likely.
Sure.
It's been my experience that very few of my plays end up the way I think they're going to end, but it's nice to get my arms around it. Okay, well, that whole thing is the preface. I used to think, well, now I'll sit down and I'll just follow that story as I write. Now I think, now that I know what's going to happen, I need to write against that. So if I know she's going to end up moving to Illinois, the work of the scene is there's no way. It's impossible for her to do that. And then something else happens. And if I know, oh, well, someone's going to end up here. If Carl is going to be the one whose chair ends up in that room at the end of Lonely Planet, my work on that play, and this is not conscious when I wrote Lonely Planet. This is years of teaching, trying to tell me about my own damn plays. I somehow must have known my work is to write against that. So that's the last thing you see coming. This is a weird thing, but it's also delicious because we get to work forward and build our story. But writers out there who think, well, I wrote exactly the cool story and it feels kind of flat. The bigger work you're doing is to not let that ending happen, or not let that ending happen yet. And so coming back to what you said, I think some of those they might be little Easter eggs. I think more often they're little complications, are me troubling the character, complicating the character, complicating the moment. There's that image of a student taught me this. There's that. He said, well, Dietz, there's three kinds of endings in the theater. And I said, oh, really? And it was beautiful. He said, well, it's like three ways to catch a ball that you toss up. And I said, say more. And he said, well, that kind of snap ending is you toss the ball up and you catch it. End. Boom. I know comedies have that ending. I don't know. Certainly really satisfying. Boom. The second one is toss the ball up. Ball doesn't come down. You get this sort of comic mystery ending. And then the third one, which is I think the classic one that we live in now, is the ball gets tossed up, it gets caught, and then it gets dropped. That's the way we make theater now, mostly, because even that definitive moment and ending, it's not completely a happy story at the end. We're all scared of having happy endings.
Right.
And it's not a mystery. It's that sort of catch and drop. That to me is off topic a little bit, but
not at all.
That to me is that notion of that the story tries to snap around that character, but there's a complexity in that character that keeps it alive and quickening. That's what I'm talking about. Doubt. I want the characters to have a lot of great qualities, but I want them to have a fierce doubt about how they will go about getting what they're after.
Got it. I want to keep going with this intricacy thing. So you kind of mentioned it. So like, since they're very intricate, they're very layered. I mean, how do you keep track of what you've written and where you're going?
Oh man, sometimes I just
know.
Don't. Sometimes I just don't.
And you need to.
I think I ultimately need to, but I'm a my wife, who's a very accomplished playwright, would dispute me on this, but she's back in Austin. I'm in Seattle, so she can't barge in here and correct me. And she would. You should.
We'll get her on one time too.
You should. Oh, Allison Gregory, you should get her on. She's awesome. She doesn't think my early drafts are messy. They to her they look way cleaner than her early drafts, but they're messy to me in my mind. They're messy in that I'm sending a lot of shoots out as like a bamboo or something. Where that comes from is that I'm trying to put each character in their own story. Boy, that's easy to say. It's an easy thing to say to students. All the characters are in the same play, but none of the characters can be in the same story.
Sure.
Again, you don't owe me that. That is my fundamental thing, because when I used to put all the characters in the same story, I'd have Joe, and then I'd say, oh, he needs a friend to talk to, and then I'd give him Bob, and Bob has no story other than to talk to Joe, and the dad has no story. And none of us are in each other's. All of us are in our own stories. I'm not in your story. We don't walk around saying, "What would I do if I were me?" You know, and so I think those intricacies early on are the fact that, and much of my story making classes have to do with, I'm going to situate a character in what the Greeks would have called a kairos moment. Kairos, two types of time to the Greeks: chronos, tick, 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 and kairos, the opportune moment, the threshold moment.
Can you give an example of what that is?
Romeo's walking under a balcony. Life-changing moment. You can't go back from that moment. And
is that the same as the inciting incident? Would that be the same thing?
I think the inciting incident is more of a plot thing. That would be, to my mind, that would be Romeo and his buddies get an invite to go to the party at the Capulets.
Got it.
That's a good catalyst.
Sure.
But again, individuating it for the character, those threshold moments. And so what students will say, well, guys, there's going to be another play about the night before someone's wedding. Yes, you bet it is. It's just why is it the graduation? Why is it his last day at work? Those cusp moments between you that you can't go back from. So I think early on I was I was occasionally adept at finding for my lead character a really powerful moment in their life. And then I would just surround them with people to talk to. And when my story making work, which is much more complicated, is yes, I do what they have family or they meet someone. How do I put that person in an opportune moment in their life, in a threshold moment in their life? That early drafts, James, is going to be really intricate and messy. And then I think I'm looking for strands to bring them together. Probably the best example of that is this play I might call This Random World that was at Louisville a few years before the pandemic, which was the ultimate outgrowth of that, of characters. It's called The Myth of Serendipity. There's the subtitle. It's all the characters you think have to meet each other in the story miss each other, and they all meet a stranger, and so the audience puts together the whole story. That was fun for my story brain.
Sure.
But I think that, so is it a planned intricacy of the plot? Again, that's only the third time in my life I've said that word out loud. It might be a planned intricacy of the play, but it's more likely an outgrowth of trying to complicate the individual journey of the characters.
So to keeping track of things. So one other thing that I've noticed that your characters in certain pieces, they overlap in dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
So do you write up the full line and then determine when that line will intersect and separate them later? Or do you write it out exactly how it is on the page when you're going through?
I probably do a little bit of both. I will confess that lines that are just like cutoff lines that just end with a dash. I try to be very honest, because the smart actor will always say, Dietz, so what is what is Tom intending to say here? And if I have to be really honest, and I say, I have no idea. I have no idea. Because I am also, to me, those are moments of sound. Those are moments of, I want an aural propellant, or I want an aural complication. And in what I think what you referred to is, if I have a line and then I have someone tries to interrupt them, but the person keeps going. My attempt is to, and it's a cheat sometimes. It's a total cheat sometimes. But my intent is to make that person who's overlapping work a little bit harder. If I'm trying to, to me, the most important person to direct, to me, the most important person to write is not the speaker, but the listener. So if I can't make the speech better, I'm going to activate the listener, make them a little bit more contentious, make them a little bit more, no. And it's standalone. Those are really silly lines. Right. I'm trying to activate the listener to make it harder. It can't be easy for anybody to say a line in a play. It just can't. I mean, that's too prescriptive, but I'm trying to complicate the line I know I'm going to put in because I love it. Right. I don't believe there's a myth, murder your darlings. That's ridiculous. Put your darlings to work. If your darling has work to do, no one's going to say murder it. But again, those are tropes. People carry these tropes around. If you love that line, you have to cut it. No, but that line has to have a job. So you said something about tricks. So Linden fiction uses the phrase tricks and writerly shenanigans. Yeah. So what are some more of yours? Oh God. Well, probably certain twists and turns. Some of that is those linguistic tricks. Some of them you could also call craft, which is getting into a scene very late, trying to start at the climax of a scene. That's probably a trick / craft that we all use. I overcomplicate my stories, and that probably amuses me. But I also know that if I don't know which ball is going to fall, I'll just keep a bunch of them in the air really long. My use of time, which is probably what it's one of the fundamental classes I taught at UT, was my class on time. You'll see how that shows up in my plays, and I think sometimes my use of time is a glorious craft device that, and I think sometimes my use of time is absolute shenanigans. By the end of fiction, where we watch this marriage fall apart, and then we come back to the very last scene is them meeting for the first time in a Parisian cafe. You've seen 1,000 movies that way. Those were tricks too, but I will press. I can press that bittersweet buzzer pretty regularly because I know how to get you there, and you may like it or not. But though, yeah, I want all that stuff to be. I want all that stuff to be alive on this desk. Sure. Because as I said, I'm not sitting at this desk thinking I have an idea for a play. I'm sitting at a desk knowing that something I love to do and that I get to do is write a play. There's one other one. Since you brought it out of style or tricks, or would you say that I couldn't think of the right title or label for this, and so I'm going to call it a run-on word sentence, for lack of a better phrase, like in fooling with infinity. Is it right? Fooling around with infinity. Why am I putting this tie on? Is
and you do it in a couple plays where it's a run-on word. It's all, there's no space, there's no punctuation. It just, and maybe it was Becky's new car that you did it in.
Oh,
I don't remember.
Probably.
So why is that opposed to hyphenated sentence or something like that?
I am trying to signal. There's two parts of this. In those cases, it's the same thing with the curse of capital letters. It's the same thing with, when I fall in love with italics. It's the same thing with whatever. And then I go through plays and plays and plays where I disenthrall myself with italics or crunched sentences or whatever, or spacing and pagination. And then I come back to it. Some of it is probably while I'm writing, is certainly a kind of crutch. In my defense, I would say in the early readings of the play, I am trying to signal an actor. I'm trying to signal an actor, maybe not towards a reading, but towards an intention.
Sure.
Not my intention, but like I'm just trying. I want a clarinet there. I don't want a harp there. I want a trombone there. I want to have this. When those things then, and many of them do, then live through drafts of the play and then get published. I don't know that they're very helpful then when they get published. They're still being signaled. Perhaps they're still signaling to subsequent producers. But
I mean, from an acting standpoint, I mean, I can pick that up. I get the intention. I totally got the intention.
Okay. Well, that's helpful to know. I have a healthy, again, it's what I said earlier. It's like, that's one of those things. And I love this conversation about, tricks, even if it means I won't be able to write now for a week after this podcast. Because I'm trying to keep a healthy skepticism about my craft, and did I really make a better pass on that scene, or did I just repaginate it? Right?
Sure. Yeah. So I have two questions on that regard. First of all, when it came to the publishing of that, are there moments where the publisher's like, "Hey, look, you got to change this," and where you were like, "No, this was done by choice, and I'd like to keep it that way"?
Well, my publishers have all been great. And again, when we say publishing, you and I think are talking about in the theater, most of that is licensing. So I've never had a single play published on like a hardcore book. When we're talking about like these published actor copies. And so those publishers have all been great to me, and they are trying to signal the actor how maybe at some point I heard that line. What typically, doesn't track, and this is a numbers game and a page game and everything. It's just layout on the page. Is if I'm, and this has been a you could say a trend, you could say a trope in recent playwriting, but I would have grad students that would put 3 lines at the top of the page and then leave the whole page blank, and then 1 line at the bottom of the page. That is to signal space, air. It's probably also to disrupt their process and have their play not look like someone else's play.
That's a waste of real estate in my mind.
I forgive it as a teaching thing, but that kind of pagination, I try to be candid with them, is that if you're lucky enough to have Sam French or DPS or Broadway Play Publishing publish that play, it's not going to look like that on the page.
So let me ask you that in that, because I try to get DPS on to do an episode, and I reach out to I try to reach out to Concord, but then you got to leave a voicemail, and so I know I'm not going to get a response yet. First of all, do you use Final Draft to write?
I do. I have for as long as I can remember. I mean, my God's Country 1988 was the last play I wrote on a typewriter. And revised it on a typewriter, just wrote a new draft every day during previews. And then I probably wrote in Word for a year or two. And then I certainly since 1990, I've been in Final Draft. Yeah.
So you're using the playwriting format that's built into the Final Draft.
Tweaked to lay out the way I want it to. And I I love it. I can't imagine it otherwise.
No, 100%. But my curiosity is, and I don't understand why DPS and Sam French or Concord or whatever they're going by now requires almost similar to a screenplay format, a little bit different, stage directions, indented all the way to the right. But yet when I go buy a copy of a Stephen Dietz play, that's not how it's printed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know why?
No, I think they have I don't know. You should get,
I'd love to.
Kent from DPS, or there's great, and also I think the copy editors. I've dealt with some great copy editors. When you and I get off this, maybe we can share some names. But they're awesome. They're doing sort of God's work at those places. I think the template they're moving a lot of plays through, and I think they're I would say somewhat in their defense that template is a little bit enshrined. And I would also say most of the people who are getting those plays, God love them, out in the world that are looking to do this play at their theater or at their community theater or whatever, they would like it to look like the other plays they've received. Sure. And I get that. That's a mechanism.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Just something I thought because you're published in both the main public theater publishers. So I just thought maybe, you might have an answer because I haven't been able to get to them as far as that goes.
Yeah.
I've noticed some complex sets with your work, and let's take More Fun Than Bowling, for instance, and the piles of dirt on stage, and it's or else you take the simplicity of fiction with a table and two chairs. So, but when it's comes to the more complex thing where it's bringing piles of dirt on stage, and how much thought do you put into that as far as the production goes, or it's just like, this is what I imagine, they can figure it out? And do you need to teach your students to take that approach rather than you don't have to explain how it's done or how you do it, just write it and let the scenic director or whoever it is figure all that out?
I agree almost fully with that. The latter of that you said. Paula Vogel is a great teacher, was always very, very fond of encouraging the students to write the impossible stage direction, right? The thing that can't be achieved on stage. That again that's to pull something out of the writer and have them not hear the voice on their shoulder saying, well, there's no way that we're going to be able to show Lake Superior on stage or something like that. The director in me, who was alive before the playwright showed up, it is always curious to know how the heck would we do that? What would the move be? My advice to students was likely be bold in what you are making. Think about if you are making that to depict something or to conjure something. We are not a depiction medium. That's film and television have that all over us. What we have all over them is that we're a conjuring medium, and that flag can represent Spain, and that one piece of ice can represent Greenland. And so I would encourage them to think about how can you have the most potent, and sure, make it ridiculous if you need to, but what can be the thing you're going to put on stage that's going to conjure something bigger? And I mean bigger on a lot of levels. I mean maybe literally bigger, and also deeper. And then when you're lucky enough to have that play done, let what you wrote be the starting point. And I don't ever want to see a student of mine, because I will return and I will find them, and they know this about me. I don't want to see them sitting at the meeting with their arms folded saying, no, it has to be that way. That's the way I wrote it. You got to say, I think it's this. I'm giving you a bold ass thing that I think it is, and then let the designer do their work and be part of that collaboration. Which is a word we think is easy, but it's a word that's hard. But I think it's best use, and you'll see my plays have gotten more and more spare in some ways. I think its best use is to lift for me. Its best use is to lift me out of a small pedestrian thinking. I get terrified when I've written very few plays that are just set in like rooms. Like Last of the Boys is in a yard. Rancho Mirage is a play I'm very fond of, but it was scared the hell out of me because it's literally it's three couples in a babysitter in a suburban home. That talk about ruining all my tricks. And so then I just made the plot ridiculous. But anyway, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, absolutely, it absolutely does. Are there certain workshops that you teach or that you taught, or maybe that you still teach, that you find are quite useful?
I would hope.
Or exercises that you assign, I should say.
I would hope so. I'm the students that have studied with me I do a lot of master classes around the country. Sometimes I'll devote them specifically to story making, because that seems to be useful not only to playwrights, but to directors and actors who want to write, or people writing spec TV, or writing film or fiction or something. I enjoy doing those. I do directing master classes and collaboration master classes, but which I am very fortunate that I get to do those. But my sort of core class, which sort of proved to be the first year of all of our incoming grad students, I've now taken to calling it the living play, and and I do it as one master class actually in October through the Playwrights Center in Minneapolis. I'm doing it broken into its three component parts, and the three component parts and the goal being just, how does my play stay alive? How does not what is my story about, but how does my story stay alive? How do I have that quickening so it leans me forward? And the three sort of pillars of that I teach are motion in dialogue, motion in a scene, motion in a story. You're saying, do you mean action? And I'm saying no. We teach action. I think action is irrelevant on the level that action is about things happening. Motion is about things changing. And I used to write scenes where nothing was happening in my scene. It was just a bunch of dialogue. So then I would have them play ping pong and do the same scene. And I go, yeah, now my scene has action in it. The question in the scene is not changing.
Right, sure.
Motion to keep scenes, dialogue alive. I do a lot of dialogue work. The other pillar is status. So that's essentially motion between characters, the power dynamics between characters shifting. And the third one is time. How do I situate my play in that potent moment in that character's life? How do I complicate them? Where in time do I go to get that scene? We follow Death of a Salesman for a while, but the money scene in that is when we're going to go back to that Boston hotel room. We're going to go back and hear that scene, and that scene's going to answer everything in the present. I could talk about time it'll bore you to tears. But those three things, motion, status, and time, again, I don't know how other people learn. I don't really know how other people think, but the great thing about my full-time teaching gig at UT was it made me coalesce around core principles. And that's core principles of keeping moments alive, keeping relationships alive, that status, and situating it in characters' time that is most alive. That's sort of my core teaching. And I've written about it, and I've promised my former students a book, so I'll work on that. Now I've said it on this podcast.
There you go.
But those are my thing, and there are workshops that I do and master classes around the country.
No, that's great. Is there, if we haven't touched on it already, What was the most important thing that launched you forward while at your time at Playwrights Center, Minneapolis? What was the most important thing that you learned that was like, okay, that clicked and set you in motion?
They rewrote their plays. They made their not everyone, candidly. I watched, because I had lied my way into their job as the director of their reading or the director of their workshop. And this was with August and Lee and John Olive and all these people that gave me a chance. And then contemporaries of mine that were coming in. I watched the writers, as different as they all were. I watched the writers who could take a note, maybe do the opposite of that note, maybe ignore that note, maybe use that note, but I watched them take it in and I watched them do the work again and again and again on a play, and to play the long game and be stubborn with, yeah, that's it. Thank you for that reading. That play does not work. And then being able to be, and I've never had, that always happens. I get surprised every time after 40 some plays. I go, yep, had a reading of that doesn't work. And then to be, how do I become diagnostic about where, and not what it's about? How do I get diagnostic about where did I lose them? What was the move? But I watched them revise and work. And that I think, coupled with just an ethos that I was raised with by parents who knew nothing about the theater, but who knew everything about work, diligence, stubbornness, was that. And it's maddening, James, because and I probably just done it. We say to writers, you need to, writing is not writing, it's rewriting. And I always say to writers, I've never had a play produced. I've never had a play I've written produced. I've just only had plays I've rewritten produced. We can say all these things, and then we don't tell them how. So a lot of my craft work, I teach a masterclass on revision, is I can't get in your head and tell you what to revise, but I can report to you. I can report a moment that the language is passive. I can report a moment that scene closes so neatly that it makes the next scene have to work really hard. We need to help each other. We need to talk about the craft of revision more. And I think, and writers have to be open to it. Writers still fold their arms about their play. I think new play development has gotten better and better and better and better. And I think writers' approach to taking advantage of new play development has gotten worse and worse and worse. And I hope that incites people to talk a little bit more.
Sure. Is the active voice only active, for lack of a better word, in stage directions, or can you be passive in dialogue as well?
Oh, sure. We hedge, like I mean, I hand out like language traps. It's transitional phrases. Anyway, I think we should go to whatever. It's naming the emotion. I'm so mad at you. It's passivity, and it under the guise of making it sound like the way people talk. We owe nothing to the way people really talk. I don't want to go to the theater and hear how people talk. I want people to talk better or sharper, what a friend of mine always called parking lot wit, which is the thing you're in a moment and you want to say something so bad and you say, shut up or something. And then you get out to your car and you reach for your keys and you go, got it. That's what I should have said. In the play, I want the parking lot wit in that moment. And I watch people write great. I do an exercise where we take a great sentence and we make it bad. Or we start with a famous sentence and we say it mediocrely, like everywhere you look, people are acting. People I don't know have always helped me out. or I have always depended on the kindness of strangers. And it can't be relied on the kindness of strangers because that's too sweet. The depend, the P in depend is a gift to that actress. Relied, you're going to get that sound when she gets to kindness, right? But depend, it has a D and a P. That's like money to a good actor. So that's that. All of those are. But I'll watch people take a strong sentence. I'll watch someone write, "Men have always been my demons," and then I go, "That's awesome." I don't know I don't care what it means. I don't care if it fits in the scene. We can figure it out later. But then I'll watch a well-intentioned room of people go, "Well, have they? Didn't she have that boyfriend in high school?" And they talking with the best intentions. The writer goes, "Most men have been my demons." And someone will say, "Well, but you know, when you said always, I mean," and you'll watch the sentence again, going full loop, James, back. Thing about Richard Hugo, go with the sound, because only the sound is empirical. I'll watch the sentence get much closer to the meaning of the character, but the actual sentence is dead, dead on arrival. Or passive, I should say. So I don't know what the question was.
No, it was big. If it's big, can you is active versus passive only in stage directions versus dialogue? And it's fascinating. I've just never kind of moved forward like that. You know, I've talked about it in some of the workshops I did with the younger playwrights, and I talk about active voice versus, but I've really kind of only applied it to stage directions opposed to dialogue. And that's a fascinating approach.
I would just assume people are, I would just lift. I just want I want my characters hopefully do talk much sharper than I do. I'm a fairly articulate person because I talk in public a lot and I've had to get better at it. But like, I want, even if that character, you say, well, that character's not very educated, he's not whatever, all these other nonsense we put on that character still can be impactful. And you know, so if you wrote a 3-page scene, and I work in really small increments in my classes, then I would have you cut that down to a 3-line scene. And you'd say, well, I can't do that. And I say, sure you can. We're not going to keep it. And then I have you cut that down to a 3-word scene. And it's going to teach you what words have potency, but it's also going to make you, it's like me asking the director of, what was it, Cherry Orchard, like, what's wrong with that play, right? It's going to make you say, it's going to make you put a different lens on your 3-page scene. If I had to pull it down, this sort of going, it's probably a harrowing thing to see on a screen. The sort of leaning in and leaning out of your play. That is something that can be taught, but it's something I really think that writers need to be able to do, instead of like what potency, leaning back out, full story scene. That's a little too general, I know, but.
No, not at all. When you first start your workshops or you first start your classes, I always try to find the best word for this, and I don't know if your biggest mistakes, worst habits, biggest flaws that the beginning playwrights have.
Oh, I think it's that mythology. I mean, the first thing I say is no one's ever had an idea for a play. And it's the thing I said to you about, you know, even some of the things someone give you, they're going to give you like a move or a line or whatever. And so give yourself a break, first of all, and forgive yourself that you're not walking around with a great idea for a play. But the flip side of it, after you've given yourself a break, get to work, because you no longer have any excuses. And I have dear colleagues who are successful in the field who I'll get together with, and they'll say, well, yeah, I'm kind of stuck right now. I don't have any ideas for a play. And they know they're telling this to the wrong person. If you want to, well, then don't do the work. I mean, and that's you're right. I don't, you know, a lot of the things I think we think of as virtues, I think are tactics. Collaboration's not a virtue. I'm a fan of collaboration. It's a tactic. It's a tactic to hopefully make the work better. Someone says to me, well, I write every day. I would never tell them not to, but again, my friend, that's not a virtue. That's a tactic. Some people say I write, and it's true that we want to learn how everyone else writes until we know our own mojo. But I do think that there's a lot of misperceptions, and there's a lot of and I try to just, and I've done it here, I've tried to just talk about them head on, like write what you know. Right. is there's a lot of half truths. I think that's a lovely, well-intentioned, half truth. Why this play now is a well-intentioned half truth that has no bearing and will only just shut you down.
Sure.
So that's the stuff I try to get at, and the fact that ideas are made. I don't believe they're found. I believe they're triggered, but I think they're made.
I want to go back a moment ago when we were talking about a three-page scene going down, make it a 3-sentence scene, going to 3-word scene. How do you know when to keep going, or even when to pull back, whether that's a monologue or a scene? Because I've noticed that I wouldn't say that it's overwriting, but when I've read certain things, especially like in Lonely Planet, and I'm reading, and I'm like, this is just it's long, but it's just there's nothing. It's necessary. There's nothing that needs to go away. Whereas sometimes you find a lot of people overwrite, and there's just too much. Like, get rid of all this stuff. And I just don't find those moments with you.
Well,
so I wouldn't keep going or when to pull back.
I would say the way I would frame that is that it's the reason I came around to I wanted a way to test. You're talking about a way to test let's just say a scene. Maybe it has some dialogue or a monologue, and let's just say a scene. I wanted a way to test that. And as a young writer, my test was, well, I really like it. And I go, well, then I'll keep it. But then 3 days later, I'd look at it, or I'd have a reading, and I'd go, oh, I don't like it.
Okay.
And my test was totally based on, is it good? Is based on this question. Is it good? Does it work? I am not in this podcast saying, don't ask yourself, is it good? Does it work? There's no way to test your scene with those. Those are meaningless questions. There's no way to test your scene. But if I look at it in terms of motion, I can test the scene. I can test the moment of dialogue and say, has the question in the scene changed? Has the question in the scene changed? After this 5-line exchange, is there new information? Is there a reversal? Is there a surprise? Is there an escalation? Is there major new information? Is there a paradigm shift? Those are all tangible things, whether I like it tomorrow or don't like it tomorrow. So in the Greenland speech that you might be referring to in Lonely Planet, which is a big ass speech, I'm never looking at the length of anything, because in terms of revision, I'm never cutting for length. I'm cutting for motion. I'm cutting stasis to get it motion. So the Greenland speech, I think, holds, and it used to be way longer. But it holds because it sets up a turn at the end. People I know are dying. That is my Greenland problem. Now, I could have taken too long a road to get there, and I used to. But again, I can test it. I can test the motion of it. And so that's I guess what I would say. So a lot of my teaching is based on some writers don't want a metric. Or maybe they think something's being taken from them, which I don't buy. Craft just gives you something. Craft doesn't take anything from you. That's my way I tell, and I do that. I'll do that when we get off this call. I'll have a scene I wrote yesterday. I'll print it out over here, and I'll immediately mark it up. And I'm not cutting for length. I'm just saying I'm cutting for motion.
Okay. Few other questions, and then we'll cut this because I know you've got somewhere to be. I want to go to music, and not music in your dialogue or scene, but a lot of your plays have musical suggestions.
Yeah, they do
throughout or in between scenes. And so are those songs inspiration for specific moments, or do you cite on those songs later? Because there's sometimes I'll hear a song and I'm like, I know exactly what's going on in this moment in this scene, and I'll use that as an inspiration.
Yeah.
To figure out where it's going, or do you just say later on, it's like, oh, I can see this here. This is what I recommend.
Good or bad, it's usually really early, and that's such a good question. But the best use of it I can see, James, because I don't always like when I get handed someone else's play to direct, I don't like them telling me what the music should be.
Sure.
But I try to view it, usually, because people and their musical tastes are way fiercer than that's like, what's the best taco in Austin? That's like serious. But I do get, as you said, in my more evolved moments, I realize, I'm getting a window. I'll always listen to the music that's suggested, and I am hopefully getting a window into something about that writer, or something about the mood, something about the feel. But the analogy I would come back to is when we talked about scenic design, which is that I would hope the producer or the director of my play would take it in as information. Would take it in as this proved helpful to me, and I pass that on to you. There are beautiful theaters out there who I've flown to a production, and they've just soup to nuts done exactly the music that I called for, exactly the verses, exactly the whatever, and I thank them profusely. But then a little part of me is saying, I hope there wasn't a song that you thought, God, this would be so much better. Our production. I don't want a definitive production of my play. I want it to have lots of variations. And also, since we've talked about Lonely Planet, my little intense window of writing Lonely Planet, I listened to nothing but Chet Baker instrumentals, Chet Baker singing, and it put me in the sort of this perfect, beautiful melancholy that shows up in that play ultimately. And then when I directed the first couple productions of it, and I thought, well, man, I'll just put this up. Man, I'm in charge. I'm going to put this Chet Baker. It was terrible. And I realized the music that I needed to hear while I wrote the play in that case, and I think in many cases ever since, was completely the wrong music.
Sure.
For the delivery system of the play, at least in my opinion.
One other question, because you just triggered something I had to ask, and you said, I don't want it to be, I hope you had ideas or something. So does that include dialogue?
No.
Okay, no. Dialogue is there, and you better stick with it.
That's the one thing that's protected in our copyright. Right. It's the one thing that's presented. Okay. No, but I want the director to make their production, their design, their choices, their intention. Right. They're never going to know my intention, because that also presupposes that I know my intention, or that I know what my intention was in 1989 when I wrote Happen.
Sure.
Who was that guy? But no, and that's what my little dabblings in you learn that the hard way. The other side, if you've written a little bit like I have of TV and film, which is that your dialogue is a suggestion. And so my dialogue in my play is fairly sacrosanct. Now I'll play ball with a question.
Sure.
You get my email and say, what about this reference here? Or I love when someone will say, I know this is a reference to the Cleveland Indians baseball team, but we're doing the play in Fresno. So can I say the San Francisco Giants? Like, yes, of course.
Okay.
But those are examples.
What are you working on now? Can you talk about it, or do you want
a little bit? No, of course I can talk about it. It's not very exciting or a mystery. I do have a couple of adaptations that I'm very fortunate that are gonna happen in the next couple seasons. I was the first playwright granted authorized to do a new adaptation of Gaslight.
I saw that in one of the bios.
Which is that we know as the play Angel Street, and then we know it as the movie.
Yep.
But I contacted that estate, and I've done a new version, moved it to New York, cut it down. I believe I amplified the power and the moxie of the female characters significantly. So that'll premiere in the fall of 23, and then in the spring of 23. These are both adaptations. I did an early Agatha Christie mystery called Murder on the Links. Came into the public domain this year, and I've made a kind of 6-character, gender fluid. I think it wants to be the 39 Steps. I don't know if it'll end up being as successful as the 39 Steps, but it's sort of an ensemble comic mystery. So, and then I have original plays at various phases that will that I'm working on and revising.
This might be maybe not a dumb or stupid question, but considering your where can people find your work?
Oh my goodness!
Besides all over.
Well, it's the main. Most of the stuff is with most of the plays are with DPS, which is now Broadway licensing. So you can go to Dramatists Play Service. Some of the early plays, Infinity and 10 November and More Fun the Bowling and God's Country, the first 5 are with Sam French, which is now Concord. Mm-hmm. And then we didn't talk about this, but I've had the good fortune to do a lot of theater for young audiences work, and both adaptations and original plays, and those are with Dramatic Publishing. So
okay.
DPS has the bulk of it. Yeah.
Okay. Can people contact you?
Sure.
On any of the socials or?
Yeah. No, I'm not.
Or email or
social media, but how's the best way to do that? I think you can just get me through the Playwrights Center or organizations that I belong to. I'm sure they have an email address for me on there. The National New Play Network, which I'm a huge champion of. I think there must be a way on there because people have been emailing me, which I love.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Stephen, I honestly cannot thank you enough for being so generous with your time, so open to communication, and being willing to come on and share your talent. And it's been an absolute treat.
It's a treat for me, and I always learn a lot when we both get to talk about craft with each other. So thank you for that.
I look forward to doing it again. So thank you for that.
Cheers.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Again, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below. Tell us your favorite moment of this podcast episode, and be sure to share this video with a friend. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. And in the meantime, until we see each other again in season 2, keep writing.